Okay, looks like our guest list is leveling off, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Our webinar today is going to be an overview of our QuickBooks Online connection, our QuickBooks Online integration with RedTeam Flex. So the agenda we're going to cover today is we'll go over the basic benefits of the integration. We'll talk about what parts and pieces connect and how that's going to save you time, how that can build efficiency within your company. We'll talk about all the trigger points, and by that I mean what flows where and when, and how all of that comes together. We'll specifically go over some best practices regarding time and expenses, because that's something that some of our QuickBooks clients tend to utilize in different ways. So we'll talk about some of the options there. We'll also talk about transaction error resolution. So both if I make a mistake inputting a transaction, how can I correct that? Along with if there is any form of error in the flow of that transaction from Flex to QuickBooks or vice versa, what kinds of troubleshooting steps and what kinds of resources do we have? Of course, we'll finish up with a Q&A as always, but if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to drop those in your Q&A. We do have Alan on the line today who's handling the chat and the Q&A for me, so I'll stop periodically to make sure that we answer any questions along the way. So this is us. I'm Sarah. I'm presenting today. I'm our Senior Enablement Manager. You probably, if you've implemented in the last 4 years, you may know me as an Implementation Manager. So just kind of shifting roles here this year into an enablement spot, but I have about 4.5 years of experience with the RedTeam Flex product. So I really love giving these trainings and just kind of showing you what I've learned from our clients and the way that they do business across the years. And then we've got Alan, who's one of our implementation project managers. So you may have onboarded with him as well in the recent past, and he's going to be handling our chat and our Q&A today. One little disclaimer before we get going, I always like to start my webinars by highlighting what product we're going over today, just so that you know you're not in the wrong room. Today's webinar will be for users of RedTeam Flex, which is our most configurable construction management software designed to kind of help our mid to enterprise level contractors from start to finish. So if you are a user of RedTeam Go, this is not the right webinar for you. You're going to want to tune into our next webinar, which will cover this same topic for RedTeam Go. So let's get started then. We want to talk about why the QuickBooks integration is useful to you and what kinds of things it can do. It eliminates dual entry. That's really the main point of this. It's going to be eliminating dual entry for your accounts payable and your accounts receivable transactions. The way that we intend that to work is for your vendor invoices and your customer bills to be entered initially into RedTeam Flex. That is the intended start point. You'll create those within our workflows in Flex, and that information is going to flow automatically over to QuickBooks Online, where you'll handle your payments in the QuickBooks Online software. So if you're familiar with the vendor invoice process in Flex, you'll also know that making Flex your entry point for AP or vendor invoice transactions is going to allow you to create a tailored invoice approval process. That's something that may not be as easily achievable in QuickBooks Online. So you can enter those invoices in Flex and allow folks like your project manager, your controller, your project accountant, if you have a project coordinator or anybody else that's kind of an intermediate review step, you can build those invoice approval workflows that meet the needs of your company. That way, everyone on the ops side who needs to take a look can do so. It gets passed then to the finance team and can be sent into QuickBooks Online at the right moment after the right people have approved it for payment. It's going to allow seamless tracking of employee time and expenses. Again, we'll talk about two different options or pathways for that today, but it's going to allow you, should you choose to use RedTeam Flex for your employee timesheets and expenses, it's going to allow you to have that information flowing seamlessly as job costs into QuickBooks Online without any additional effort on your part. We can also streamline that payment data entry into RedTeam Flex. So if you're not using the integration with QuickBooks right now, you'll know that when you approve a vendor invoice or a customer bill in Flex, not only would you have to dual enter that invoice into QuickBooks, but you'd also have to manually mark those invoices paid in Flex in order to have your payables aging and your receivables aging reports up to date, in order to make sure that your financial reports for each project are looking accurate. The QuickBooks Online integration eliminates that need for you to manually mark things paid in Flex, because as you're automatically sending those AP and AR invoices over to QuickBooks, you'll be handling the payments as you normally would in QuickBooks Online, and that information will automatically flow back into Flex and mark them paid. That way your reports in Flex are staying up to date in terms of what has been paid and received for your accounts receivable. We're also able to seamlessly keep track of both financial reports. So the goal is that with this integration, you have full access to up-to-date reports in Flex as well as QuickBooks Online, because all your pertinent information is there. Specifically in Flex, you've got a receivables aging and a payables aging report. You've also got the WIP. Hopefully you've seen our WIP. If you're not familiar with it, we definitely have an existing webinar that you can go back and watch on demand. But that work in progress report is created and updated live in Flex. So it's really a great advantage to be able to have all that financial information flowing back and forth with QuickBooks, so that you know your WIP and your revenue and gross profit reports in Flex are totally up to date at all times. The same will be true of all your reports in QuickBooks Online. So before we move on, we're going to talk about trigger points here in a moment. But does anyone have any questions on what connects and what does not? We're going to get a little more detailed here in a moment. Are we seeing anything in the Q&A yet, Alan?
No, we're not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then we'll go ahead and move on here. So this is trigger points. I know it may be a little bit difficult to read this graphic that I put in, so I did link to the help article that we have. I really love our QuickBooks Online help article. You'll find when I lead an integration call to help you set up your QuickBooks Online connection, I actually have that article up every single time because there's so much great step-by-step information in there. One of the things you'll find is this chart, which is going to explain to you what connects, what is the language for that item in Flex, and what is the language for that item in QuickBooks. And in the arrow, you'll see some text telling you what causes that information to flow in one direction or another. So I'm going to go through primarily the transactions here. What are the trigger points that cause information to flow? But I also want to talk a little bit about what we describe as lists up here. So different pieces of information that are useful in both systems. So for example, customers will flow across with each transaction, right? Who is your customer? That will flow across. The customer facility in Flex comes across as a sub-customer. So you'll notice this, right? This is one thing some of our users will ask about, which is that customers and customer facilities, they come across here as a customer, a sub-customer, and then the project itself comes across as a sub-customer. That's relevant because those of you who use QuickBooks heavily may recognize that QuickBooks now has a projects designation. At the time that we built this integration, it did not. There was no projects feature in QuickBooks. So you do have the ability to convert those sub customers that we send over into a project. That can certainly be done, but just know that as we're sending that information across, we don't initially send it across as a project, if that's how you're used to tracking and kind of categorizing your transactions. Definitely possible. You'll just want to take a look at QuickBooks support to understand how to convert a sub-customer into a project. But these all flow across as information pertinent to each individual transaction, which means if I had a new customer in Flex that does not exist in QuickBooks, I won't see that customer come across to QuickBooks until the first invoice on a project, the first transaction on a project that involves that customer. So we push them across on an as-needed basis. Same with vendors and employees. You're going to see that if I had a new subcontractor that I created in Flex, they're not going to flow across immediately upon saving that vendor company. Instead, that vendor company would push across to QuickBooks with the first vendor invoice or the first AP invoice for that subcontractor. You've also got a note over here telling you, hey, any existing vendors in QuickBooks can be imported into RedTeam. And I'll show you where you can do that. We'll take a quick look at the app card here after we finish this slide. Same with customers, right? If you have existing companies in QuickBooks, you are welcome to bring those across, import those into Flex so that they're already linked before you start doing business in your Flex database. And then last one here, employees. You can see employees will come across into QuickBooks as vendors with a new timesheet or expense transaction. So as you commit those, you'll see the employee show up in QuickBooks as a vendor, but not until that point. It's all transaction based. Now, what we really want to talk about is those trigger points for the transactions themselves. And you can see by the arrows here, what's flowing from Flex on the left to QuickBooks on the right is your customer bills or invoices, your vendor invoices or those AP invoices, your employee timesheets, and your employee expenses. The only things that flow back in the opposite direction from QuickBooks to RedTeam Flex is payment information. So payments received flow back across as customer payments. Payments paid out to our vendors for our AP transactions come back across as vendor payments. Excuse me. And that happens upon payment in QuickBooks. So when we look at what buttons am I clicking to make these things happen, vendor invoices, those AP transactions, hopefully you're familiar with how to input those into RedTeam Flex, right? Whether you input them one at a time or via the spreadsheet, as you're approving invoices, there's a point in step 2 of the invoice entry called job costs. When we hit the commit button and finalize those job costs in step 2, that is the first of 2 trigger points to send across those invoices, those vendor invoices, to become vendor expenses in QuickBooks. As we hit that commit button, it will flow across with the due date 1 year out. So again, remember in step 1 of invoice entry, you're specifying a payment due date. That is based on your payment terms, might be net 30, might be the 10th of the following month, whatever your payment terms are, you'll specify a due date. When you hit commit, let's say your due date is May 31st, 2025. When you hit commit, that invoice will flow across as a vendor expense in QuickBooks marked with a due date of May 31st, 2026, and a payment status of pending approval. It will be visible in QuickBooks, but the intent is that it won't be marked as ready for payment. It won't start showing up on your payables reports until the final execution. Execution by your final approver is what causes that updated due date to flow across. So that is, if you recall, in the final step where the approver is looking over all the details of the invoice and they have the ability to hit approve or reject and cancel. That final approver should be checking a box that says execute this disbursement authorization upon my approval. That's permissions based, right? You get to determine who's allowed to do that. But the final approver of your vendor invoices should be checking that box before they hit approve, because that's what's pushing the correct due date over to QuickBooks and making that payment status from pending approval to payable. Should you forget at any point, should your final approver forget to check that box, you can absolutely go back to any approved invoice in the list view and hit the tools icon, that little Rubik's Cube icon, and change status to executed. So it can always be done retroactively if you're seeing a due date that doesn't show up correctly in QuickBooks. So that's our vendor invoices. I'm going to stop there because I know we've covered quite a bit on this slide. Alan, are we seeing anything in Q&A at all for the moment?
Nothing yet.
Awesome. Thanks. So now we'll go to customer bills. This one's a bit simpler. There's just a single trigger point. When we commit a customer bill, it will be sent over to QuickBooks Online as a customer invoice. So that's a simple piece. In the billing tab, when you create those AR bills, as you hit the commit button to finalize them and lock them in, they will go ahead and send over. Payments, both AP and AR payments, appear in Flex as soon as they're completed in QuickBooks, and I will show you where that's at here in a moment. Employee time is sent over upon commitment of the weekly timesheet, and that comes over actually as a job cost entry. You'll notice that as a difference here in the chart. Our vendor invoices come across as vendor expenses, but our employee time and expenses come across simply as job cost entries. So I have had some clients who say that they need it to come across as a vendor expense. If for any reason that's the case, rather than entering something as an employee expense, you could enter it as a standalone vendor invoice, right? From the top menu bar, you can hit add vendor invoice and choose that it's a non-commitment invoice. That's another way to send across something that you need, to pay out as a vendor expense. But typically, we're seeing both of these come across as job cost entries. That timesheet is committed at the end of each week, either by the employee themselves or by their supervisor. And at the point that it's committed, you'll see it show as separate transactions. Each entry on the timesheet for a various project and cost code will show up as a separate transaction, a separate job cost entry. For employee expenses, as we commit that expense, it's sent across to QuickBooks. So same process there. Lastly, down here, I've gone ahead and again connected that help article. So if you'd like to see some more visuals or some more details on these trigger points, you can absolutely come back to these slides and do so. But we're going to go ahead before we move on and take a look at that app card, how we can bring in our employees and vendors. And we're also going to look at where we will see some of those payments come across, because I know those are things that folks don't always get a chance to visualize. And this is the help article, by the way. I grabbed the wrong tab here. So if you need it, that link will send you to this Connect to QuickBooks Online. That's going to show you not only how to set up your integration, but all the finer points of troubleshooting and trigger points. So here, this is a sample database that is connected to QuickBooks Online. So we'll go down to the app card right here. And I want to show you, if we go to our QuickBooks Online app card, we have the ability to import vendors and customers from QuickBooks. So this is useful when you first connect. If you have vendors or customers that don't yet exist in Flex, you can bring them over to save you the dual entry. Otherwise, if they do exist and you're worried about duplication, you can come in here and checkbox any of these. Over here on the left is all of your vendors who exist in QuickBooks. And as I check the box, I can import them, or we can go ahead. I think this is still loading because it's searching for all our RedTeam vendors. Yeah. Or we can link them up with an existing RedTeam vendor, right? RTS, RedTeam software vendor. So it's telling you, if, for example, I have A&L Construction in QuickBooks and I also have them in my RedTeam database, I'd be able to link them here as opposed to just importing. And I'm going to reload this page. Apologies for the issue there. Let's see if we can show you what that's going to look like. There we go. So again, we come into the app card. We choose vendors or customers. And we can checkbox any of these. That may not load for us. I apologize, guys. We have a lot of vendors here in our training database, so that may be the issue, that it's just having trouble loading them all. But again, these would be drop downs. You can type in if you know you have, right? I know I have AAA branch, or I know I have ABC Construction, but they might have a slightly different name. I can start typing and they'll pop to the top of the drop down. You're going to see either an import button or a link button over here next to the close item. So as you start checking boxes, you'll get the option to import. If you've chosen a vendor under the RedTeam software side, you'll have a link button there. So let's go ahead and we'll reload this one more time so I can show you the payments. So that's another thing I want to make sure you know where to find those. Under the companies menu, your vendors and your customers menus are both going to have a payments tab. And what we hope is all of that information will be coming in as you place it in QuickBooks Online, right? That's the point of the integration. So my invoices will show you that change status option. There's my invoices tab. And again, if I had something that was approved, but I forgot to mark it executed, right? It'd show here in blue. I can always come back here and change status to executed, right? If I have one, let's see if we've got one that's, yeah, so we should have an execute option for any of these that are finally approved. And you can make sure that that proper due date flows across if your final approver forgets to check that box. And then payments over here, you can come in and filter. It's looking for draft, right? So we can go ahead and look at our committed ones as well. May have to open up our date range here. And in fact, this database might not have any. We're probably not processing payments in our sample QuickBooks, but this is where you'd be able to kind of filter by status and date range and see all of your transactions there. You can see all your payments in QuickBooks. And if you need to, you could come in and remove those in order to make corrections, which we'll show you in a bit. So any questions at this point, or are we okay to move forward? Looking good? Okay, then we're gonna move on to time and expense best practices. In this section, I kind of created two separate slides, excuse me, because I really often see two basic approaches. It really depends on whether you are intending to use RedTeam Flex as your solution for timekeeping and or expenses, or whether you already have a solution in place. So of course, what we'd love to see is that you are handling all of that in-house in RedTeam Flex. That's the approach I have right here, and we'll kind of talk about how we set that up. So if you intend to use RedTeam Flex for your timesheets and your employee expenses, you want to make sure that in the app card, we toggle on the preference for time and expenses. This is new. So if you've been using QuickBooks Online integration up to this point, you did not have the ability to say, I don't want to use time and expenses. It was kind of an all or nothing. The integration included those pieces. In the last couple of weeks, we've actually released an update that's allowing our clients to choose independently, would I like to use timesheets? Would I like to use expenses as part of the integration? So if you're using RedTeam Flex for time and expenses, you do want those turned on in the app card. We'll look at where you can link your company credit cards, because I can build a list of all the credit cards my employees use for expenses. And I can link those individually to the correct credit card account in QuickBooks to make sure that those transactions are flowing properly. We also want to look at the utilization of time and expense codes, because if you're using our timekeeping and our expense functions, you do have the ability to log overhead time or expenses. That's transactions or time that don't flow to a project budget and a cost code. That might be things like for time, overhead time might include PTO or sick time, drive time, office time, anything you can't bill to a particular project. Expense codes might be things like travel expenses, fuel for the company vehicle, lunch meetings, anything like that that you may cover as an expense, but not code to a project budget. We'll look at how to build those. You're also going to link those to specific QuickBooks accounts. And then lastly, if you're using us for timekeeping, we don't currently integrate with any payroll solutions, but what we can do is export our payroll report. So you'll have the ability to do that from the employees menu. So let's go take a look at that. We're going to look at company credit cards, time and expense codes, and then our payroll export. So down here in configuration, we have the ability here to create company credit cards and time and expense codes. It can also be done from the app card, so I'll show you that in a moment. But we can go ahead and click on company credit cards, and we can create as many credit cards as we need. It is as simple as picking the credit card account from your QuickBooks Online. Now, what you'll see in the dropdown will be only your credit card type accounts. So you're not going to see any of those other accounts. You can go ahead and grab any credit card type account from QuickBooks, give it a name. Could be Sarah's Visa, could be Home Depot card, and this card can be carried by multiple people. So if you have multiple cards issued for the same account, go ahead and pick that account, give it a name, and you'll be able to assign these credit cards to your employees, which we'll look at momentarily. Now, if you see the credit card in red text means it is not linked to a live QuickBooks Online account. So that lets you know you're not going to be able to send transactions. You'd want to come in here and select the correct account. And it's also showing me who carries this card. We've got a lot of employees that carry that card, right? So that's company credit cards here. We can also look at time and expense codes. We give you some default time and expense codes. They'll initially start out in red text because they're not linked to any QuickBooks account, but you can create as many of those as you want. You can go ahead and come in here, select the type of account. Indirect time would be for overhead time entries. Indirect expense would be an option you want folks to see when they're logging overhead expenses. So indirect time, again, if I choose indirect time, I can choose if it's regular or non-working time, right? Non-working would be PTO. Regular might be something like drive time that doesn't code to a project, but I do want to track it and pay them for it. Give it a title, possibly an alias if you want, and then choose the correct account that should be tracked under for QuickBooks. Every item in here is going to show in a drop down. So when your employees are filling out their timesheets, they choose to enter either direct or indirect time. Every item in here marked indirect time will show as an option for them when they're entering indirect time. Every indirect expense will show as an option in a drop down for them when they're entering their expenses on their mobile app and they choose it's an overhead expense, it doesn't flow to a project budget. They'll be able to go ahead and pick from administration, business meals, hotel stay, whatever that may be, a gift for a client, right? Um, we can track as many of these as we want, and each flows to the correct QuickBooks Online account. Now, let's see, we also wanted to talk about our payroll export, so let's go take a look at that. Under our employees menu, we do have the ability to go to our time tab and review time for all employees. We can filter here, and then there's our payroll export, right? You've got various reports you can pull here, but payroll export is the report that's designed to allow you to export all that data. If you're using the payroll export report every week or every month, whatever makes the most sense for you, if you're pulling this report, you're going to want to make sure that you have your employees' workers' comp codes up to date and that you have their hourly rates up to date. Even if I'm job costing in Flex using labor categories, I'm still going to want that hourly rate inside the employee's profile in order to make sure that my payroll export is showing the correct rate for them. So while we're here, let's also go back and look at one of our employees and how we can assign those credit cards. So if we hit edit, we can scroll down here. They're in payroll, right? I can set Ashley's hourly rate to make sure. And I want to say, yes, she should be on my payroll export. And then company credit cards here. I can look through the list of all the credit cards I've created. And I can say, yeah, she carries a copy of Sarah's Visa. Add that to her list. Now, every time she logs an expense, she's going to have three options for paid by. Employee, which means she paid out of pocket, Sarah's Visa, and Visa credit card 133. Those three options will always be available to her. She can choose the one that's appropriate, and if she chooses Sarah's Visa, that transaction will flow appropriately to the right QuickBooks account. So that's what we want to see in terms of this first approach, right? If you are using us, RedTeam Flex, for all of your time and expenses, those are the things you need to consider. However, we do see some of our clients, excuse me, for whom keeping their timesheets or their employee expenses with us is not practical for them. Lots of our clients keep time through their payroll software, and that feeds directly into QuickBooks Online for them. Plenty of our clients use something like Ramp for credit card transactions, and that may flow directly into QuickBooks Online for them. If that's the case, you have a time or an expenses solution that you really like, and you don't plan to transition to RedTeam Flex, this is the other approach. This is what I would recommend, is we're going to track all of our time and expenses via those external systems into QBO, and then we're going to manually import them into RedTeam Flex. Now we want to toggle off the preferences in the app card if that's the case. And I'm going to show you where those are at. And once those are off, the integration is not going to connect time and expenses in any way. Now, it shouldn't be a problem because your employees won't be entering time sheets and expenses into Flex because they're doing it in these other softwares. But just as a precaution, we want to turn it off so that if a new employee enters a timesheet entry or enters an expense when they shouldn't, that transaction doesn't accidentally flow to QuickBooks, right? Or if you are keeping time in Flex for job costing, but you want what's in your payroll system to be flowing into QuickBooks, that might be another reason to toggle those preferences off. But once we have those off, I'm going to show you how to use bulk entry via the transactions menu. We're going to add all of our payroll and our expenses, job costs in, whether that's weekly or monthly or daily, via the transactions menu as adjusting entries. That's going to circumvent the integration. The only way that I can bring a new job cost into my budget on a Flex project is through the transactions menu if I don't want it to flow to QuickBooks. All of the other transactions, vendor invoices, time, expenses, all of those are going to flow to QuickBooks automatically. So we want to make sure if it already exists in QuickBooks, we need to put it in through the transactions menu as an adjusting entry. And then we also want to talk about restricting permission for timekeeping and expenses to prevent accidental use. Even though we've turned off the integration for it, it could still end up on our project budgets if someone is filling out timesheets or expenses in Flex when they shouldn't be. So let's go take a look at that. We're going to look at the app card first. Down here, we'll click on QuickBooks Online. And under our preferences, you're now going to see these two options. Do not send employee time to QuickBooks. Do not send employee expenses to QuickBooks. You would toggle these on essentially, right? I want to check the box to turn those items off. I want to say do not send these. Otherwise, the default is that they are on. They are a part of the integration. Once we do that, then we also want to make sure that we are handling our permissions. Right here, we can go into roles and permissions, and I'm going to show you a trick here for kind of peeling back a permission for everyone. So we can kind of I'm going to go to service provider admin. Doesn't really matter which role you go to, and you edit. Oops, excuse me. You want to open. We kind of come in here and open, and we're going to search. I'm going to search for time. I could search for expense, and I'm going to find those pertinent permissions in terms of manage timesheets, edit own timesheet, right? These kinds of permissions that allow us to handle timesheets. We can click the document on the right, and we can remove everyone we want from that list, right? We can go ahead and remove permission from everyone right here. That's an easy way to strip out a permission that you don't intend anyone to use. I don't want anyone to have the ability to add entries to their own timesheet. Okay, remove it from everyone. And that's just going to help you ensure that nobody's filling out timesheets or expenses by accident before you've got them trained up. So that's where we would do that. And then we also want to talk about how to enter through the transactions menu here. So this item B, utilize bulk entry in the transactions menu, that's going to be right here. In here, generally speaking, you're going to be seeing every transaction that takes place within RedTeam Flex. It is auto-filtered by date to today only. So a lot of folks will come in here and go, well, I don't see anything, but I know I have lots of transactions. It's filtering to today. So you can come in and filter, open that date range up and see all the transactions. It's actually going to be quite useful here because this is where you can see exactly how things are flowing. It's going to let you know what accounts are being hit. So you can see ET for employee timesheet. We can see it's crediting our accrued payroll and it's hitting our direct labor accounts for two separate entries, right? We can see an employee expense is hitting that credit card, John 1234, and it's hitting our overhead account because it's an overhead expense. So this is just a nice way to visualize exactly which accounts in your QuickBooks are being affected. This is where the bulk entry is going to live. If we hit new, we can make a single job cost entry, right? That's helpful for a single, think of it like a journal entry or an adjusting entry that you don't want to hit QuickBooks. You're just updating your project budget in Flex. But more importantly, down here is the import option. This is for those who need to bring payroll or expense information in bulk into their RedTeam Flex project budgets. You're going to download this spreadsheet. You could have 1,000 transactions across 20 different projects, all in the same spreadsheet. No problem. It can be as many transactions as you need across a variety of projects. Fill in all the required information and then copy and paste it right here and hit upload. If you have 100 transactions, those transactions are immediately going to fall into the actuals column of the correct budgets and cost codes for your projects. So this is the way that you'd be doing it if you're not keeping time or expenses with us. You're bringing that information in manually on a periodic basis via the spreadsheet. That way your reports here stay up to date, your budgets here stay up to date, but you can take advantage of perhaps those helpful integrations that allow your payroll system or your expense system to feed directly into QuickBooks. So with that, any questions in the Q&A right now on this second approach before we move on? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on. The last piece here is transaction error resolution. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is error resolution, as in, oops, I accidentally mistyped something, right? I was putting in an AP or an AR invoice and I made a mistake. How do I handle that? How do I peel that back? That happens pretty frequently, right? We see that where clients reach out. If you uncommit, right? We talked about our trigger points. The committing and executing of an AP invoice is what sends it over. So if I want to pull it back, I need to unexecute and uncommit that AP invoice. Same with an AR, the customer bill. I would uncommit it in Flex. When you do that, when you pull it back to a draft status in Flex, it will automatically remove itself from QuickBooks Online. So you don't need to go to QBO and manually delete it. You just need to go ahead and peel it back to draft status in Flex. It will automatically send again upon recommit. And then we want to note also, this is something that trips folks up quite frequently. If you say, hey, I made an error on that vendor invoice, I need to go back and correct it. We'll quite often get folks telling us, well, but I can't uncommit it. It won't let me unexecute. It won't let me uncommit, even though I'm an admin. If there is a payment applied against that invoice, you will not be able to pull it back to draft status. So that just adds a step in the kind of peeling back to correct that error. If there's a payment that's already been applied via QuickBooks, you will need to delete that payment in Flex via the payments tab that I showed you and in QuickBooks. Once the payment is removed, you can then uncommit that invoice, whether it's an AP or an AR, and it will pull itself back out of QuickBooks for you to correct and resend. So that's your data entry errors. Your integration errors, right? Hopefully you don't, but if you come across any transactions that error out for you that don't flow across the way you would expect from QuickBooks or from Flex into QuickBooks Online, you want to make sure first you can keep an eye on those in the transactions menu on the top menu bar. So over here, this icon right here is what we're talking about. I see 16. That is 16 transactions that did not flow to QuickBooks as intended. And I can take a look at these. You can see this one is simply unlinked. These ones are unsent. Unlinked might mean that I committed that before I set up my QuickBooks integration. Unsent, that exclamation usually means there's an error. And what we would want to do is go ahead and click on this little speech bubble here. And usually I just go ahead and expand all of this. And that's going to show me any error messages in here. So I can see this one's pending, right? That's not a super helpful error message, but it allows me to see. You may see red text in one of these steps that cues you in to what the problem is. We can come in and expand any of those and see, right? So that's not super helpful, not great error messages to show you, but that can give you some information here. The other place to go look for error messages is going to be in the apps card, in the transactions log. So if we come here and open that, we've got a transactions log right there. That transactions log is going to show every transaction that has flowed across and its status. And you can see, hopefully, they all say successful post. We can, however, filter in here to find a status of error, right? And we'll filter and hide. And that will show us more error messages over here, right? Non-zero balance or required parameter line. You can see these different, hopefully, right? It's something that makes sense, right? Some of these errors are pretty self-explanatory. Some of them are not. We don't expect you to handle these all on your own. So if you're coming across any of these, first, you can review the help article that I mentioned earlier. You've got a link for that here. There are common error messages and their solutions listed in that help article. And hopefully that'll do it for you. If you're not seeing what you need in there or you're needing a little extra help, you can absolutely hop in the live chat and let us know what error message you're seeing. You can give us the transaction details and our team will be able to help you get that error resolved, right? We hope that's not something that's happening on a regular basis for you. Certainly if it is, I would recommend that you set up a live meeting with us to talk about how your control accounts are configured. But if you're coming across the random stray error, the help article is here, the live chat is here to help you troubleshoot those issues. But does anybody have any questions at all? That is the end of everything I wanted to show you today. I'm happy to hang around and answer questions if there's anything in the Q&A. Are we seeing anything at all, Alan?
No, no questions.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, everybody. I will keep this open for just a few more minutes in case anyone has a last question they'd like to type in. Otherwise, you'll have access to this video and the slides coming out to you after the conclusion of the webinar. Thanks so much for joining us.